Hi everyone, you're listening to the Health and Wellbeing podcast. I'm Alison Mitchell, a practicing naturopath, and you can find me on naturopathnsw.com.au. These podcasts will feature discussions on various health conditions, health tips, and nutrition from a naturopathic perspective. Sometimes it's just me, sometimes I'm interviewing guests. All the time, I hope to share with you information on health and wellbeing with the aim to empower and educate. Please remember that all information is general and not a specific recommendation that replaces consulting with a practitioner. Please talk to your healthcare practitioner before undertaking any changes to your treatment regime. Medicinal mushrooms are all the rage in the natural medicine world at the moment, and I'm a pretty big fan of mushrooms myself. I remember when I was at university, one of my first nutrition assignments I ever did was a video about the nutrition content of mushrooms and their health properties. It was pretty funny. I put some little googly eyes on the mushrooms and I made them dance around and talk about how good they were. I forced my boyfriend, who is now my husband, to do one of the voiceovers too. Fast forward to now, and not only do I still encourage my patients to eat mushrooms, but I also use them in clinic as medicinal extracts, powders, and also sometimes liquid extracts. My most used mushroom extracts are reishi and lion's mane, but there are many other mushrooms which will get covered in this podcast today. So given how much I like mushrooms, I'm pretty excited to have with me today Jeff Chilton, who is an expert in the world of medicinal mushrooms. He's joining me all the way from California. Jeff was raised in Pacific Northwest and studied ethnomycology at the University of Washington in the late 60s and started working on a commercial mushroom farm in Olympia, Washington in 1973. During the next 10 years, he became the production manager responsible for the cultivation of over 2 million pounds of agaricus mushrooms per year and was also involved in the research and development of shiitake, oyster and enoki mushrooms, which resulted in the earliest US fresh shiitake sales in 1978. In the late 70s, he was a founder of Mycomedia, which held 4 mushroom conferences in the Pacific Northwest. These educational conferences brought together educators and experts in mushroom identification, ethnomycology, and mushroom cultivation. During this period, Jeff co-authored the highly acclaimed book, The Mushroom Cultivator, which was published in 1983. In the 1980s, he operated a mushroom spawn business, and in 1989 he started Nammex, a business that introduced medicinal mushrooms to the US nutritional supplement industry. He travelled extensively in China during the 1990s, attending conferences and visiting research facilities and mushroom farms. In 1997, he organised the first organic mushroom production seminar in China. Jeff's company Nammex was the first to offer a complete line of certified organic mushroom extracts to the US nutritional supplement industry. Nammex extracts are used by many supplement companies, and they're generally noted for their high quality based on scientific analysis of the active compounds. So thanks so much for joining me, Jeff. How's the weather over there?
Well, actually, we have a sunny day today, and that's something that we feel is very important. When the sun comes out here, we are overjoyed because this is the rain country here, unlike Australia. It's wet and moist.
Yes, whereas here we're having completely the opposite situation of no rain, and there's lots of drought going on. Although at the moment, for us, the weather's really up and down.
Well, we're moving into fall, and we've had our summer here, which is really the best time in this part of the world. I'm in British Columbia, so the summer was quite nice, but in the fall we start to see the rains, the temperature goes down a little bit. However, what that does mean is it's mushroom season.
Yes, that's good. So do you personally go out foraging for mushrooms?
Oh yeah, I do, and I have been foraging for mushrooms since the 1970s actually, and even before when I was younger, and I really enjoy it. One of the things about wild mushroom hunting is it's like a treasure hunt. So when you go out, for one, you get to take a very nice walk through the woods, you get fresh air, you get to feel the natural environment. It's right underfoot. But also, if you happen to find a choice edible wild mushroom, that's the treasure.
Yeah, that's a bonus. Yeah, the walk is the main thing, and then the mushroom is the bonus.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And we have some amazing forests here, Allison. They're just, like where I live right now, I'm in a first growth forest. This is a virgin forest here. I have some trees on my property that are close to 200 feet tall. That would be like 65 meters tall.
Oh my
They're
goodness.
they're trees that are they're trees that have been there for maybe 500 years. They're amazing trees. It's like, and I have a dozen or so of these trees on my property. It's just a beautiful environment here.
What sort of trees are they?
I've got cedar trees. We also have trees here called Sitka spruce, which are really big, beautiful, straight trees. And then we also have some what are called hemlock trees. They're all what we would also term an evergreen tree. So they don't have leaves, they just have needles, so they're always green. And that's kind of what this area is like. It's always green.
Oh, it's beautiful. Well, at the moment, I have a cherry blossom in my front yard that's currently
Oh,
sprinkling its little flowers everywhere. And in my front end backyard, I've got a gum tree. And so gum trees do get pretty tall, but they they also drop a lot of leaves at this time. So,
right. Yeah, I actually experienced some of the gum trees when I was in Australia in December of last year. So I got my first look at the gum trees, which are pretty much all over in Australia. They're really beautiful.
and we've got a few different varieties of them. And some of them you really wouldn't want in your backyard because they can drop these big limbs without warning and can really injure you if they fall on you.
Yes,
Hey,
I think actually my girlfriend's had a limb or a tree come down right on her house a few years back.
yes. Yeah, the gum trees are too close to my house, but I think they got planted, by someone just being very naive about how big they'd actually get.
Yeah, you never expect them to grow that big when you plant them.
No, and so quickly too.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we're not talking about trees, are we? We're talking about mushrooms.
Indeed, we are.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's just start with a pretty basic question. What is a mushroom?
Well, the mushroom itself, what we see when we're out walking in the woods, that's actually the what we could call the fruiting body of a fungal organism. And the fungal organism itself, the vegetative body, is underground. It's a network of very fine filaments, and those fine filaments are called a mycelium. So they're out there underground, and they're growing and consuming organic matter. They're breaking it down into ultimately humus. They're part of a whole group of different organisms. There's fungi, there's bacteria and yeast, all working together to break down organic matter into soil ultimately, and each one's got a role to play. But the mycelium is there. It is breaking down organic matter. It's amassing nutrients, and when conditions are right, it will this mycelium network will produce a mushroom. And then the mushroom, as it matures, and the mushroom will only be there for maybe a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks, and then it will just decompose back into the ground. Whereas the mycelium is out there, and it can actually be perennial. So the mycelium, this is one of the things about mushroom hunting. Maybe you know this, but mushroom hunters never reveal where they've found their mushrooms, because mushrooms will keep coming back at that same location every year, as long as there's more food to eat. So this mycelium produces the mushroom. The mushroom matures. It will produce spores. The spores fall down, and at some point they will germinate and start the whole cycle over again. So the mushroom is actually the what we will see, the manifestation of this mycelial network.
So the mycelium is actually much, much bigger than the mushroom itself.
Can be, yes, indeed. The mycelium can be traveling around through the ground for miles. It all just depends on whether it finds new nutrients. As long as they're a nutrient source, this mycelium will grow and propagate. If it runs out of nutrients, which does happen, the mycelium will itself die, and it will get consumed by other organisms. So it's not eternal. but
Okay.
it is there and will produce mushrooms. And interestingly enough, that mycelium is what, as a mushroom grower, I would use to grow mushrooms. So mushrooms, when you grow mushrooms, you don't use spores, and you don't have, and mushrooms don't have seeds. So the way you would grow mushrooms is you'd take this live mycelium and you would grow it out on some sterile material, and that would then be used to inoculate. Let's say you want to inoculate a compost, or you want to inoculate some uh, wood logs or some sawdust. That live mycelium is what we would use as our seed.
Oh, fascinating. I,
Yeah.
I find mycelium so interesting because like over the time I've been interested in mushrooms. I've looked into it a little bit and I've found some really interesting facts. I heard a mycologist named Paul Stamets describe it as the Earth's natural internet, and that it was used as a communication network for fungi. Um, is that true that they actually talk to each other?
Well, actually, no, it's not true. And here's the thing, it's an interesting speculation, but the fact of the matter is that two different mushroom species, they do not communicate, because essentially when the mycelium of those mushrooms get reach each other, there is what is called a zone of inhibition. If they came together to where they were actually fusing and formed a bigger network, they would be the same species. So that's the difference. That's one of the things about a species of mushrooms, is that each species is very separate, and unless it can mate with another mycelium, those two myceliums will not come together. They cannot come together. That's basically one of the. It's just like trying to grow two different plants, let's say, to hybridize them. Some will hybridize, some will not. But basically, two different mushroom species will not come together. So the idea of a mushroom an internet of mycelium. Here's how I like to look at it. I mean, think about it for a second. Where I live, we've got just as much tree root under the ground as we do fungal mycelium, and we have tree roots that go forever, one tree after the other, forests of intertwined roots. I just think that in general, I think nature, and I think what's under the ground, whether it be the mycelium, the bacteria, all of these different organisms, microorganisms, plants, I think they all communicate without being a fungal internet. I think there is a much bigger, uh, let's just say, a bigger network going on here. So I think that communication is happening. We kind of think of, oh, unless there's a word going out there, and then somebody on the other end hears it and then calls us back or something like that, we think, oh yeah, there's no communication going on. I think there's lots of communication going on out there in many, many different ways, and so that's how I look at it. I look at it as a very large ecosystem, and fungi and mushrooms and their mycelium are part of that.
But it's just not communication as we know it.
That's correct. I mean, that's one of the things we have to be very careful about, and that is projecting ourselves onto the natural world and thinking that everything kind of works according to our view of it. And let's face it, Allison, our view of the world is pretty much designed by our culture and what they teach us at school. And so, in a way, and there's so many different cultures with so many different views of the world. You just have to look at it and say, the world views that people have is culturally specific. And who's to say that my view of the world is any different than, or better, or in some way superior to somebody's worldview that's halfway around the world, speaks a different language, is living in a mud hut, and you know what I mean, is a hunter-gatherer or something like that. We really have to be careful about how we view that, especially when it comes to giving a purpose to things. You know what I mean?
Yes, I totally do. It's very, very wise words. I think that we shouldn't project on other people in any instance, and we shouldn't project on other things. But I mean, it is part of human nature to try and understand things by trying to relate to it, of course. But no, very, very
Oh yeah.
wise. Yeah.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's just who we are, right? And it's fun, but
Yeah.
it's not necessarily reality. I mean, reality is a real kind of elastic concept, and I think every culture lives in its own matrix. And is that matrix true reality? No, probably not. So, but it works, and it's very functional for that culture in how it needs to relate to its environment in order to survive.
Of course. So, okay, so we were talking about mycelium,
Yeah.
and you were myth busting a few facts for me. So while we're on the topic of myth busting, is it true
Yes.
that mushrooms are more closely related to humans than plants in their DNA?
Well, you know what? This is interesting. I'm not sure of that specifically, but mushrooms and the fungal kingdom, the fungi, they breathe much like we do. So they breathe in oxygen and breathe out carbon dioxide, which is like us, not like plants, which is do the opposite. So they do share some attributes with us, and yeah, it could very well be that we share more DNA with the fungi than with plants. The other thing, of course, that is interesting that we have in common is that we have a storage carbohydrate called glycogen. So do mushrooms. They also have glycogens. Plants have starch as their storage carbohydrate. So that's a very, very distinctive difference between fungi and plants, and that's something that we can talk about in more detail too, because it's really interesting method to use to actually do quality control of medicinal mushroom products.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, well, we can talk about that a little bit more later. That'd be great.
Sure, sure, yeah.
Okay. Um, So you, in your company, you use a lot of medicinal mushrooms. So how do they differ from mushrooms that most people know of?
Well, first, let me just say there are probably 2 dozen mushrooms that are cultivated for food. There's maybe I don't know, let's just say 2 to 3 dozen mushrooms, wild mushrooms that are utilized for food. So mushrooms are a really good food, and a lot of people are going like, really, a mushroom? Well, yeah. The interesting part about it is that nutritionists in the West, they always considered mushrooms to be a non-food, and the reason was because mushrooms did not have any calories. Mushrooms are very low cal. So back in the day, especially when I was getting into mushroom growing, which was I started out as a mushroom grower in 1973. Worked as a commercial mushroom grower for 10 years. I know mushrooms intimately. In fact, I lived with mushrooms literally for 10 years. I was living with them. And mushrooms have a good quality protein with a good complement of essential amino acids. They are high in carbohydrates, and those carbohydrates are the kind of carbohydrates that we want. They're trehalose, they're mannitol, they're carbohydrates that break down slowly. They're not starchy carbohydrates. So mushrooms have that really good food aspect to them. And I tell people, eat mushrooms, put them into your diet. The other thing about mushrooms is they're high in fiber. And so they're a wonderful prebiotic. So eating mushrooms has a number of different, very positive aspects to it. And so I start out by encouraging people to eat mushrooms and put them in your diet. One of the first ones I'd say to put into your diet is a shiitake mushroom. I don't know if you're familiar with shiitake mushrooms. It is a wonderful, very tasty mushroom. It's got a great aroma, a great flavor. They grow them now. They're probably available in your area. So,
Yeah, they are. I love them.
oh, shiitakes.
Ooh, got a plane going over.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That sounded like it was right in your front room.
Yeah, well, it has gotten pretty close a few times. One time it rattled off a light fitting.
Well, too bad it wasn't dropping mushrooms.
Oh, I know.
So and the interesting part about it is that certain of these edible mushrooms are also medicinal. And here's what's really interesting about mushrooms is that the cell wall of a mushroom is made up of what's called a beta glucan. And the beta glucan is what is the active compound in mushrooms. All mushrooms have these beta glucans. Now, certain of the mushrooms are more medicinal than others, and that's because although they all share these beta glucans, the beta glucans are a little bit different with every mushroom. Each one has a little bit different structure. So what that means is some mushrooms are edible and good for us from a food basis. Others are edible, good for us as a food basis, but also have these high quality beta glucans. And those beta glucans are what give mushrooms their immunostimulating properties.
Okay. And there are a lot of mushrooms that are not so edible but are medicinal as well, like in terms of texture and palatability. Is that true? Is that correct?
Yes, indeed. There are actually some mushrooms that are like wood, and that would be like a reishi mushroom or a chaga mushroom, and there's a few others. And um, early on in my career, I was walking around a Natural Foods Expo in Los Angeles. This was in 1990, and I had a reishi mushroom in my hand, and I was trying to introduce companies in in the health food space and saying, "Look, you need mushrooms in your product line," which was mostly green herbs, and everybody just looked at those reishi mushrooms and went, "That's a piece of wood. What is that? It can't possibly be medicinal." But so that's very true. Some of these medicinal mushrooms are not edible mushrooms per se.
Yes, of course. Um, I just wanted to sort of go off topic a little bit and just ask about, do you know how different mushrooms would have different mannitol content? So for people with FODMAP intolerance, are there some mushrooms that are better tolerated?
Well, I'm not familiar with this specifically what you're referring to, other than I'd say yes, mushrooms, mannitol is one of the main carbohydrates in mushrooms, and whether or not I mean, as a food, getting mannitol in the mushroom form, I think is really a good way to get mannitol. I know mannitol you can also get it, in a pure form, and I'm not really familiar too much with how people who use mannitol uh, um, take it in that sense, but certainly mushrooms, mannitol is one of the primary carbohydrates in mushrooms, and it's a slow acting and slow digesting carbohydrate that's a really good carbohydrate.
Well, for people with FODMAP intolerance, they actually have difficulty digesting the mannitol.
Oh, is
And
that right?
so,
Okay.
yes, so it's a type of that fructose, that type of that carbohydrate that people with FODMAP intolerance can't sort of get through those little junctions in the small intestine, and so then it passes through and ferments and causes gas and bloating and IBS type symptoms. So mushrooms are generally for people with this diagnosis of FODMAP intolerance off the menu. But I
Yes.
understand that there are actually some mushrooms that are much lower in mannitol content. And so while it's generally a beneficial prebiotic carbohydrate, it's for some people they would choose the lower mannitol content
That's
mushrooms.
yeah, that's really interesting. And mannitol, it's something that we don't normally measure, and we measure a lot of the different compounds in mushrooms. Mannitol, I've always thought of as more on the food side of things, and I haven't been familiar with what you're talking about, which is really of great interest, and I'd love for you to send me a paper about it because I'd like to get a little more educated about it, and it may be, in fact, that some of them are lower in mannitol, and I know there must be some information out there about the mannitol content of the different mushrooms because we've only tested a few a few mushrooms for the mannitol content, but not all of them.
Okay. So, from my understanding, shiitake mushrooms are something that is high mannitol, but dried shiitake mushrooms tend to be lower in mannitol, and things like enoki mushrooms and dried porcini and the little canned champignon mushrooms are actually a better option for people with FODMAP intolerance.
Huh. You know what? That's something that should be investigated a little further because I don't know why drying would affect the mannitol content. I don't understand how that. I mean, normally you dry something out and all it does is just remove the water and gives you a better idea of the profile of nutrients in that particular product. So that'd be something definitely worth investigating to find that out. Certainly, if you're prescribing, anything like that for people, or whether they can eat mushrooms or not. And it's interesting because chaga is actually a mushroom that has been used traditionally for
IBS,
is
yep.
it? Yes, IBS and other sort of stomach problems. So I just wonder maybe the profile. Chaga actually. What's interesting about chaga, Allison, is chaga is not a actual mushroom. Chaga is not even an actual mass of mycelium. Chaga is actually a tree canker, and it is mostly woody tissue with maybe 10 to 15% of mycelium in it. But it's a very different fungus and manifestation. In fact, it's almost on the edge of not truly being a true fungus. It's more a canker is a really kind of a very different type of manifestation.
Well, there's a lot of planes going over today.
They are. They're very active. I think your young baby may end up being a pilot someday.
Maybe. Yeah, well, some days I can have absolutely no planes going over, and some days there's a lot more.
Okay, well, we'll just ignore them.
Yeah. So what are some of the main uses of medicinal mushrooms? And let's list them again, just so we've got a bit of a refresher, because I know we've mentioned a couple of them.
Well, yeah, the main medicinal mushrooms I would say would be shiitake, maitake, reishi, turkey tail, lion's mane, cordyceps, and let's see what other ones may. Poria is one. Felinus is another. So I would say there's about 10 specific species that I consider to be the primary medicinal mushrooms, because I actually have a book that's got 270 different mushrooms listed as being medicinal, but 270, where do you start? So I just look at the list that's been used in traditional Chinese medicine, and then I look at the science that has been the scientific research regarding each specific species. And if there's a strong body of scientific research that supports traditional use, then I look at that and say, okay, this is a primary medicinal mushroom. And that's what we would sell in our business. We sell about 10 different species.
Okay. Great.
And,
And
and
yeah, and what are some of the main uses that people
well,
have for them?
they all share one thing in common, and that is they're called biological response modifiers, or immunological potentiators. So what they will do is these beta glucans, you'll take the mushrooms, and then the beta glucans will go down and they will hit receptor sites in our small intestine, and we have receptor sites down there specific to beta glucans.
Yes,
And when
that's
they
so
hit these,
interesting.
I know it really is. It's kind of like, why do we have these receptor sites? And that's to another area, I think, where some people talk about similarities in terms of humans and fungi, and the fact that we have these actual receptor sites for fungal matter, for beta glucans from fungi. So they hit those receptor sites, and that will that will stimulate the production of immune cells, macrophages, natural killer cells. Um, so that is really, in my opinion, the primary use of medicinal mushrooms. That's what traditionally in traditional Chinese medicine, that's what they utilize them for. A lot of times they utilize them for when people are going through a cancer treatment, or people are just run down. They are having difficulty. They lack energy. That's one of the primary uses. And I'd say that the main mushroom that I would put into that category, the one that's I would consider to be the most powerful, would be reishi mushroom. Reishi mushroom is your primary immunological mushroom. It not only has the beta glucans, but it also has triterpenoids, which are other different types of compounds which also have immunological activity, as well as they also work with the liver in terms of increasing liver capacity and in terms of dealing with toxins and so forth. So they're kind of a blood purifier for the liver, these triterpenoids. So reishi, primary immunological mushroom. The other one that's really good for that is turkey tail. Turkey tail has been actually turned into a drug in Japan. They've got a product from turkey tail mycelium, a pure mycelium, very refined product called PSK. And turkey tail in and of itself is a good medicinal mushroom. Maitake, shiitake also very good in terms of just the overall immunological effects that it has. The other one that a lot of people are using these days for endurance is cordyceps, and cordyceps is traditionally used as what they call the caterpillar fungus. It grows up around Tibet, and it is a small little fruiting body that grows on a caterpillar. And that caterpillar fungus is wildcrafted, and believe it or not, it's one of the most expensive herbs in the world today,
Is
or
it
recently.
really?
Yeah, it's like $20,000 a kilogram.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I know, I know. Now here's the what's interesting about cordyceps is that um, we've just learned how to grow cordyceps. So now all the cordyceps that we sell are actual cordyceps fruiting bodies, not produced on a caterpillar, but produced on a different type of substrate that does not have an insect involved. And when it's harvested, there's no bug there at all. It's just the pure cordyceps itself, and that's called Cordyceps militaris, and it's one of the most beautiful little funguses that you've ever seen. It is actually the caterpillar fungus is called winterworm summer grass because the caterpillar hibernates in the winter, and while it's hibernating, while it's asleep, the cordyceps fungus will germinate the spores, and then the mycelium will consume the caterpillar. And in the spring, in the summer, it will produce this little blade-like, little grass-like blade that is the fungus itself. And with with our cultivation now, we're actually just growing this little blade-like fungus. And so we have 100% pure cordyceps now at a very reasonable price. We sell it wholesale for $70 a kilo.
And given how tiny it must be to be a little blade on the top of a head of a tiny little caterpillar, I can
Yeah.
imagine that. Yeah, I can understand how expensive it is.
Yeah, no, it's true. And it's really interesting to see the actual caterpillar fungus. It's a pretty interesting, um, I guess you call it herb with the caterpillar with the little blade on it. Very interesting. And but at $20,000 a kilogram, nobody really could afford to use it. And traditionally, what they did with that is somebody who was had a illness and they were coming out of the illness. They were weak, fatigued, they would give them cordyceps, and that was one of the herbs that they used to help them come out of this illness. And so because of that, when you hear about cordyceps these days, a lot of people will say, "Oh, gee, that's used for endurance and athletics and any kind of exercise." And so that's kind of the role that it plays.
Okay. Um, but given that it's so expensive, is there a lot of fake cordyceps out there?
Well, the thing about it is that caterpillar fungus, it is super expensive, but that would never be in the market that you would go into or anybody else in the West would go into. Most of that caterpillar fungus is pretty much confined to Asian markets.
Okay.
And are there facsimiles? Yes, of course. There's when anything's that valuable, it's kind of like painting a rock gold and saying, "Hey, I've got some gold here." No, there are facsimiles. There are people out there that will try to sell counterfeit cordyceps, but again, that's something where a buyer has to be intelligent. And besides, none of my customers, in fact. I actually tried to introduce cordyceps into the supplement market in the United States back in the 90s, and everybody I talked to, you know what they told me? They said,
Oh,
our customers are not interested in eating insects.
right.
Well, and they said they're vegetarians after all. They don't want to eat meat.
So were they getting confused, thinking that they were eating caterpillars, or are they getting confused?
Well,
like,
no,
because
well,
there's
no.
a little bit of mushroom that goes with it.
No, the fact
Oh,
is
Lara,
that
sorry.
that caterpillar fungus, that the caterpillar was part of the herb, so
I see.
that's what was
Okay.
being sold. And so when somebody said cordyceps, it was what they were talking about was the caterpillar with this little fungal blade growing off it. So really nobody in the West has ever actually sold or consumed the real caterpillar fungus.
Okay. Because I thought that it was used a bit here, but maybe I'm getting confused with something else. Or I'll try and look it up in the meantime.
Yeah, you know what?
Is
That
there a
gets back
different
to,
version of cordyceps that's commonly used?
well, there is, and what they've done out there is they've
Oh,
back in
sorry.
the 90s, in China, they actually started to grow the mycelium of the cordyceps in large fermentation tanks, and then which is a liquid, and then they would take the liquid out and remove the liquid and have pure mycelium, and they called that CS4. And they did a lot of tests and showed that it was quite similar to the wild-crafted cordyceps. So CS4 has been out there in the market for a long time, but today with Cordyceps militaris, which is the true fruiting body of the cordyceps, we have access to that, and it is well priced, and that's really what a person should be looking for these days is actual Cordyceps militaris fruiting bodies.
Okay, so I'm thinking that the one that we use here in Australia is Cordyceps sinensis.
Sinensis, that's the caterpillar fungus.
Okay, and it
But
says hyphae. What does hyphae mean?
hyphae, Hyphae.
Yep.
Okay, that means mycelium. So
Okay.
hyphae actually are the individual strands or threads from a spore that's germinated, and when those hyphae come together, they will form a mycelium. Now, this brings up a issue that I educate people about, and that is a lot of mushroom products out there, Allison, are actually not mushrooms at all. They are this mycelium, but what happens is companies grow the mycelium on grain.
Mm.
They grow it on sterile grain, and then they harvest the myceliated grain and all. So they do not remove the grain from the final product. And so what happens is that the final product is a lot of starch from the grain.
Ah, that's interesting.
Well, yeah, it is, but here's the issue. The issue is that in the United States, nobody can produce a mushroom for supplement use because it's too expensive to do that. So, because if you sell the mushroom for food use, you're selling it fresh, and you're getting $5 a pound, or let's just say $10 a kilo. But then when you dry that out, the mushroom is 90% water. So now you have to get $100 for that one dried kilo of that particular mushroom.
Oh
So
God. Yeah.
economically it doesn't work. And so that's why, for example, what I do and what my company does is as a mushroom grower, I understood this a long time ago, and I went to China in the 90s, and I actually established contacts with mushroom growers in China and processors. And so all of our mushrooms are grown in China, they're processed in China, and then we test them. And if they pass the test, we bring them over to the United States to our warehouse. We test them again, and that's what we sell. We'll sell the mushroom powders. But the issue is simply that it's very expensive to grow mushrooms, not so much in China, but it is very expensive to grow them for supplement use in Australia or Canada or the United States. So because of that, people will actually grow the mycelium stage, and they will grow it on grain, which is very cheap to do. It's all done in a laboratory, and then they will dry it and grind the mycelium to a powder, but they won't remove the grain. And so what happens is that product is mostly starch.
Ah. Oh, well,
So,
that's good to know.
well,
So
you
we've
know
got to
what?
be
It's
quite
it
thorough then, don't
you,
we?
you well, you have to be very careful. And so if the product says made in the United States, you know that that's what it is. And if it says hyphae, then you know it's not the mushroom. And if it says mycelium, you know it's not the mushroom. But a lot of companies will sell that product and call it mushroom when it's not really mushroom. And that's really the issue, the quality control issue that I try to educate people to, just so that they can make an educated decision when they go into the store and see like 10 or 15 different mushroom brands. And you're like, okay, what do I do now?
Yeah, of course.
One of the things that my company's been certified organic since 1992, and I totally believe in organic certification. I believe in organic food. I believe that if we can reach a space where we have chemical-free food, and not just our food, but the environment in general, all the chemicals that get sprayed around it is quite alarming. And it's the same in China. It's quite alarming, the chemicals that they've used over there, and the pollution and the industrial waste and so on. So one of the things that I did in China was in 1997, I took an organic certifier with me to China, and we had the first organic certification workshop for mushrooms in China, 1997. And we had 24 growers that came, and they got on the path to certification. And today in China, there are tons of organically certified mushrooms that are being produced in China. And these are being certified by high quality German certifiers. And it's really interesting because I just got back from China, and the reason we were over there in early September was to see reishi mushroom harvest, because reishi a warm temperature, and that's the harvest season. And we drove way, way back up into the mountains to where this reishi farm was. I mean, literally to the end of the road. And we toured this farm there, and it's just grown in a shade house. They bury these logs. They prepare these the grounds, and they bury these logs that they've got the reishi mycelium growing on. They bury them under earth, and then the mushrooms start to grow up out of that, and it's just a beautiful sight. But they do this way back in the mountains, literally where the water is still clean. And I mean that. It's like, the water was clean, but as you get further and further out of the mountains, the water just sort of gets more and more cloudy, which is so unfortunate. And I feel so bad about any country that has those kinds of conditions. But where our mushrooms are grown, it's so important for us that they are getting the right kind of conditions to grow in and are not contaminated in any way. That is so important for me. And we test heavy metals, we test microbiological panels, we test for pesticides and fungicides. We don't sell anything unless they pass the test.
So mushrooms won't really, like if they're grown in a completely sort of, let's say, sterile environment or a blank
Yep.
slate, they don't really
Yep.
contain much nutrients themselves. What they take on is from their growing medium. So that could work in like negatively as well if they were grown in an area where there was quite a lot of heavy metals as well.
Well, no, that's absolutely right. I mean, you certainly, it's just like, when you're growing mushrooms, you're putting a lot of water on them. So they're definitely, the mycelium is sucking in the water. They're transporting the water to the mushrooms. So if you have water that's high in arsenic, your mushrooms could be high in arsenic. So, and you know what? That's not a lot different than most plants. I mean, plants, it'll be the same thing. If you have crops growing in an area where you've got certain high metal content in there, certain plants will pull up those particular minerals and will have them inside their plant body. So that's pretty common for plants as well.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. So how do people know that they're getting that good quality in their mushroom supplements?
Oh my goodness, it is so difficult. I can't tell you how difficult it is. You know what I would say? There's two ways that I would encourage people. What I encourage them to. If you have a mushroom product right now, well, open it up, open up the capsules, or if it's already a powder, taste the powder. It should taste like a mushroom. If it's a reishi powder that you've got, it should be bitter. If it's shiitake, it should have this wonderful mushroomy shiitake flavor to it. So
Dear Lara.
taste is really important.
Yeah.
The other thing that you can, I mean, for example, these products that I've told you about that are myceliated grain, where they grow out the mycelium on grain and they don't remove the grain, they will taste very bland. They will taste almost sweet at times from all the grain that they're composed of. The other thing that you can do, which is really fun, is buy a small bottle of iodine at the pharmacy. And in your country, I forget what they call it, in the chemist.
Yes.
I'm learning these things from my Australian friend.
Oh my, Lara.
Oh my goodness,
Oh,
that
let's
is a good little.
pause.
That's
2 seconds.
a,
Are there any testing methods that are used to determine the quality of products?
Well, and one of our primary testing methods that's more of a scientific take into the laboratory test is called the beta glucan test, and we test all our products for beta glucans. And like I said, the beta glucan is in the mushroom cell wall, and it's the important medicinal compound. So we can tell right away what the quality of a mushroom product is just by the level of beta glucans. And in this test, the test actually also measures what are called alpha glucans, and alpha glucans are starches, and remember, mushrooms don't have starch. So if there's a high amount of alpha glucan in the product, we know that the product is full of starch, and oftentimes that's an indication that it's a myceliated grain product. The way you test at home is to get a bottle of iodine and put a couple of capsules of your product in a quarter cup of water, stir it up really good. Let it sit in there for a little while, stir it up, and put 10 drops of iodine in. If there is starch in there, it will turn completely black. It's a beautiful test. It's called the iodine starch test.
Ooh, interesting.
Yeah, try it sometime, Allison. You'll just be shocked. And a real mushroom product, because it does not have starch, you can put the iodine in there and there will be no change to black. It will just be the color of the iodine.
Okay. That I will definitely be doing that. So, what is your favorite mushroom?
Well, my favorite mushroom is reishi, and that's the mushroom that I really tuned into very early on because there was a lot of very interesting mythology around the reishi mushroom. It's called a good fortune mushroom, so it's definitely used for good fortune, and also it's called the mushroom of longevity and long life. So reishi was really my favorite, and the way I utilize reishi is I put it in my coffee in the morning. I like black coffee, and reishi is bitter. So I'll just put it in with my coffee in the morning, and it's just another bitter note to that coffee, and so that's how I use it. And reishi is really used a lot in Asia as a tonic herb, and it's often what people take as they age because the immune system starts to slow down a little bit. It's not nearly as powerful as before. So taking reishi when you're aging is a wonderful thing to do, and so a lot of older people will start to supplement with reishi as they get into their 60s and 70s. So reishi is my favorite, and it works really well for me. I really like it, and that's what I would. And if there's any one mushroom that I would recommend to anybody to take as a general tonic herb, I would say for sure.
Yes, I love reishi as well, and I've done that before. I've put it in my coffee. It's probably a bit too bitter for me.
Well, I'm
um,
glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that it's bitter because that means you're getting a real reishi product, and that's important.
yes, yeah. I also really like lion's mane,
Ah,
and I particularly like that for that sort of brain tonic activity that it seems to give. And when you've had a baby, your brain doesn't work quite as well as it used to. So I really
oh
needed to try and get
yeah,
some of that back.
oh
And
yeah.
yeah, that's much better tasting.
Oh, so it is in fact. And let me just ask you, how much lion's mane do you normally consume in
Well,
a day?
I use the lion's mane liquid extract, and
Oh,
I tend to take it sporadically, maybe about 5 to 10 mils when I feel like I need a little bit of a boost.
okay. Well, that's interesting. I know you've got some really fine herbalists down there. One company I've heard of is called Mycomedica, is it? And a man named Kerry Bone. Do you know him at all?
Ah, yes, I know Kerry Bone, and he's actually MediHerb, and
MediHerb.
yeah,
That's
he's
right.
actually just started a new mushroom range as well.
Ah, yes, yes, yes. I've certainly read some of his stuff, and he seems like a very knowledgeable guy.
Yeah, oh, he's amazing. Well, is there anything else that you'd like to cover or like to discuss before we wrap up?
Well, you know what? I guess what I would say is, I truly believe in the power of medicinal mushrooms. I think they're a fantastic herb that people should become familiar with. I think people first should try to put mushrooms into their diet. In Australia, I know mostly you have the button mushroom there, which I used to grow on the farm that I worked on for 10 years. That's what we primarily grew was the button mushroom. It's a good mushroom. It actually has medicinal qualities of its own, but there are other mushrooms, great mushrooms like shiitake or enoki-take or lion's mane. I don't know if you get fresh lion's mane down there.
Not
Deal.
readily, but we do have the
Oh,
others,
yeah,
and
and
king oyster and
King oyster. I love king oyster. That is such a wonderful flavor. It's just almost a little bit sweet. It's a wonderful mushroom too. So that's what I recommend. First of all, I recommend that people put mushrooms in their diet to start with, and then if they feel like maybe they'd like to try mushrooms for, even energy or immune system issues, then go ahead and try some mushroom supplements and see if those work for you. Could be the lion's mane, like you're saying, for a little cognitive function, or it could be reishi, maitake, or turkey tail, something like that for immunologic effect. But yeah, that's what I would recommend to people. Make mushrooms part of your world.
aha, love it. Well, that's a great way to finish up. So thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it's been my pleasure, and I've enjoyed speaking to you, Allison, and listening to your youngster there. It's been really
Yes.
an interesting little musical behind the scenes.
she's she's normally really really happy, but I think there might potentially be a tooth on the way. Um,
Oh,
yeah, but we'll see. Could just be a
okay.
mood. Could be a leap. Who knows?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. There's
Yeah, but
lots of
I've
possibilities.
definitely enjoyed talking to you, and hopefully this will be really helpful for a lot of other people as well to listen to. So thank you so much, and everyone, thanks for listening. If you want to subscribe, you can do so on iTunes. Search the Health and Wellbeing podcast, and please leave us a review. So thanks, Jeff. I'll see you later. Bye.
All right, you're welcome, Allison. Bye.